Lightfoot's been out of office for 3 years, but Republicans are still using her name as a talking point on Capitol Hill. Tonight, she hits back. The former mayor of Chicago gets to the point.
From Chicago's very own, with WGN political editor Tamon Bradley, this is The Point.
Good evening. Former Chicago Mayor Lori Lightfoot is back in the headlines this week. Her name came up yesterday during the confirmation hearing for Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche. Take a listen.
Now, Mayor Lori Lightfoot sent the world a letter suggesting that we should not confirm you as Attorney General. Who is Mayor Lori Lightfoot, just for the record?
So she's the former mayor of Chicago. I believe she had a brief stint in the Department of Justice prior to her political life.
Right. She thinks cops are a bigger problem than criminals. Would that be a fair assessment?
She definitely, her public rhetoric is not something that either myself or this administration supports, which is to always back our law enforcement.
Would you put her even in charge of a ham sandwich?
I don't believe she should be any part of this administration.
Well, the people of Chicago apparently agreed. I think she ran for re-election and got 16% of the vote.
Former Chicago Mayor Lori Lightfoot is here. Welcome to The Point.
My pleasure.
I bet you wish we had a program like this when you were in office, right? So no doubt people saw that and are thinking, hey, keep our mayor out of your mouth. What did you think when you saw that?
Well, I got notified by somebody yesterday morning that my name came up during the Todd Blanche confirmation hearing. And frankly, initially I thought it was a joke. What would be the point of bringing me up in a hearing that should be one of seriousness and gravitas, vetting somebody who wants to hold the highest law enforcement position in the country? And so then I saw the clip and I read a little transcript that somebody said. I thought, is this guy a clown? What on earth has this got to do with anything? And people initially thought, because of the way that he described it, that I personally had written a letter. I signed on to a letter with 1,200 other former DOJ lawyers. And yes, I do oppose the appointment of Todd Blanche. I don't think he's qualified. I think, frankly, his body of work as the DAG, the Deputy Attorney General, it speaks for itself, which is a record of justifying militarization of law enforcement against our citizens, a record of carrying out the worst impulses of President Trump in trying to go after political opponents. I don't think this guy speaks to the values and independence that is necessary to be the Attorney General. He is not. That position is not the president's personal attorney, as he slipped up in his hearing yesterday and said, I'm Trump's attorney. No, you're not. The Attorney General of the United States is a people's attorney, and he doesn't get that. His track record speaks for itself. But this clown show diversion by this senator from Louisiana, it's just hard to fathom. But I guess I should be feeling good that I'm living rent-free in yet another Republican's brain 3 years after I left office.
Kind of remarkable. Senator John Kennedy said he asked Blanche if he put you in charge of a ham sandwich. I mean, it's just bizarre.
Yeah, I mean, look, there's the old joke that a prosecutor could get a grand jury to indict a ham sandwich. So that's the metaphor that he was butchering there. I think maybe I'll send him some ham sandwiches and let him chew on that.
I wonder, too, if those folks might be aware of your ICE accountability project. I know you're collecting information. What information do you have, and have you gathered enough to be able to turn over to prosecutors?
Well, it's reporticenow.com is our URL. We've gathered a lot of information, and we continue to do so as ICE activity picks up around Chicago and Chicagoland. But the point is a public repository of information about incidents, about specific agents. That's ready and available now. But unfortunately, as we know, the Cook County state's attorney has decided she's going to sit this one out and isn't going to do what other county prosecutors have done across the country, which is defend the rights of residents of a county against excess and abuse of federal immigration agents. It's a lost opportunity here in Chicago, but I think we got to keep beating the drum to say, Eileen Burke, stop being missing in action on this important issue.
You obviously came up in that hearing, but what was not raised is the alleged prosecutorial misconduct within the U.S. Attorney Andrew Boutros' office. He's well known in legal circles. So I'm curious, do you know him, and what do you know about what's going on in his office?
I do know him. We were not in the office at the same time. When he was a prosecutor, I had a case that he was investigating. Look, I was not favorably impressed with him before he got the nomination, and I think the things that he's done since he's been in office, he's more interested in currying favor with what I believe is a professional or personal friendship with Todd Blanche. Maybe he thinks he can come to Washington, D.C. I don't know. But I think he's sullied the reputation of this office. And you don't have to take my word for it. Several federal judges have criticized him on the record for the things that he's done, not the least of which was his actions in redacting and trying to hide what went on in a grand jury regarding the Broad v. 6, but specifically not being forthcoming on the front end about his own actions. He went into that grand jury and, you know, talked about a lot of high-minded principles, but he went into the grand jury after they had no-billed, meaning refused to return an indictment. He complained to the chief judge, who then wrote a letter to the grand jury. He then went in, and then guess what happened? An indictment was returned.
Do you think Washington ordered him to investigate the Broad v. 6?
I don't think they had to order him to investigate. I think this is a guy that was anxious to make his mark, anxious to curry favor with his bosses, Todd Blanche and others, and curry favor, frankly, with President Donald Trump and demonstrate that he was completely compliant with this over-aggressive federal immigration enforcement. And so I don't think they had to tell him. I think he was looking for opportunities to make himself stand out amongst U.S. attorneys across the country, but obviously it's backfired spectacularly.
At a press conference, he discussed information that was under seal. Have you ever heard of that from the U.S. attorney?
No, that doesn't happen. And, you know, obviously the magistrate judge wagged her finger at him, made him come in. Nothing came of it, which is curious as to why the magistrate made such a big deal if she was going to just say, well, okay, don't do it again. But this is a guy who I think is unfit to hold the office. The office is hemorrhaging people. Investigations are not moving forward on critical issues like public corruption is essentially non-existent. Very little being done on the kind of white-collar fraud that this office has historically been known for. I think he needs to go.
A couple other quick things, because there are a lot of people who are stepping up. They want your old job.
Yes.
It's early still. What advice would you give to a politician who has either entered the race or is thinking about running?
Well, look, I have purposely not made any public comments about the mayor's race. Look, what I think people in this city want is somebody who's competent, somebody who cares about governing, doesn't think of the job as merely performative. There's a lot of big challenges that are out there, not the least of which is the pain that people are suffering every single day because high gas prices, high grocery prices, and they're looking for government leadership that is understanding their lived experience and is going to not just heap tax after tax on them, but look internally at government, make the necessary structural changes to reduce the cost of government before going to the taxpayer. So, you know, there are a lot of people who are banding about. There are a lot of people who want to take Mayor Johnson's job. I think it remains to be seen what ultimately will play itself out. What I care about as a taxpayer, as a resident, and somebody who loves the city, I just want competent governance.
Not a lot of time left, but I know you're a big Bears fan. Do you think they're really going to go to Hammond, Indiana?
Who in the world? Who knows? I mean, look, what I am looking forward to is the start of training camp. What I'm looking forward to is Caleb Williams having an offensive line that doesn't have him running for his life every play. I'm excited about some of the new people that come in, and I'm going to be cheering the Bears on as I have for the entire time that I've lived in Chicago.
As mayor, did you think Arlington Heights was a bluff?
Well, they obviously bought the property. Look, the truth of the matter is, as we acknowledged and offered an alternative plan, the current deal at Soldier Field doesn't work for anybody. It's not a good deal for the Park District. It's not a good deal for the Bears. I think there's a lot of alternatives that can be made, but, you know, I'm not in this fight. Let other folks who are in the fray handle it. As I said, I just want to be cheering on the Chicago Bears.
Yes, indeed. Very quickly, your law firm is representing Bally's in a possible suit against the city. You negotiated the casino deal as mayor.
Yeah,
will you do any work on that case?
I want to be clear that we are not representing Bally's in a lawsuit against the city.
A potential lawsuit.
Not even a potential lawsuit.
It's legal matters then. They were hired.
We have been very fortunate to have a range of different clients. It's not appropriate for me to talk about the specifics of what a scope of work is on any particular client, but no secret, I care about making sure that this casino happens and works and gives a lifeline to police and fire.
Former Chicago Mayor Lori Lightfoot, thank you so much.
Sure.
Back in 60 seconds. Tonight, a tip of the hat to Alderman Matt O'Shea. At today's budget hearing, the 19th Ward Alderman pointed out the city's refusal to fill vacancies could lead to a unique problem across Chicago.
The worst months for garbage collection is July and August, and we're short. I want to be on record. We're short with crews on the street right now as we speak, as we've been for several weeks now. And when you don't pick up the garbage in alleys, for those of us that have worked in the Department of Streets and Sanitation, can tell you then we get a rat explosion.
Yes, confirmed. And that is the point. I'm Tamon Bradley. There's more news ahead at 9 o'clock with Mike Lowe. Flip over to the forecasters on WGN+. Good night.